I'm Sister Annie Killian, the Public Humanities Fellow at the Medieval Institute at the University of Notre Dame. We are delighted that so many of you are joining us for our Pilgrimage for Healing and Liberation series. This spring, we'll journey from the deep past to the present day to discover what pilgrimage offered our ancestors and why it remains attractive to so many today. As we'll see, pilgrimage is a practice conducive to present-day work for racial justice. It is our hope that this journey will move us further along the road to healing and liberation. We invite you to learn more about the series at medieval.nd.edu/pilgrimage. We're grateful to our co-sponsors for today's program, the Ansari Institute and the Institute for Scholarship in the Liberal Arts, College of Arts and Letters. Today's webinar explores pilgrimage in the global Middle Ages, hospitality and encounter. Pilgrimage was a truly global and cross-cultural phenomenon in the millennium between 500 and 1500. A phenomenon that helped constitute the major world religions. Why did medieval people undertake these sacred yet strenuous and really dangerous journeys? What did they experience along the way? We're joined by three esteemed panelists who will speak to different traditions of pilgrimage, provisions for hospitality, and the sacred art of shrines and holy places. In terms of format, we'll hear from all three of our panelists, then have time for you to ask questions. We want to hear from you, so if you have a question, I invite you to type it into the chat, and I'll field those later in our conversation. I'm delighted now to introduce our panelists. Alexander Shu serves as Assistant Teaching Professor for the Ansari Institute and the Liu Institute for Asia and Asian Studies in the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. His research focuses on early Buddhist scriptures in medieval China and employs perspectives from manuscript studies, genre theory, and cultural history to examine how the use of texts reflects transformations in religious reading practice. Robin Jensen is the Patrick O'Brien Professor of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. Her research focuses on the relationship between early Christian art and literature and examines the ways that visual images and architectural spaces should be regarded as modes of theological expression. She teaches courses on the character of late antique Christian and Jewish art and has researched Christianity in ancient Roman North Africa. Mun'im Sirry is Assistant Professor of Theology with additional responsibilities for the Contending Modernities Research Project. His academic interests include Quranic studies, interreligious relations, political theology, modern Islamic thought, and Southeast Asian religions and cultures. The author of Scriptural Polemics, the Quran and Other Religions, Sirry is now finishing up a monograph dealing with both traditional and critical scholarship on Islamic origins. We're so grateful to our panelists and excited to hear from them today. So we'll begin with Professor Jensen.
So I would like to begin just by thanking all of you for being here and thanking Annie for hosting us. I would go ahead and share my screen and I will try to do my quick presentation of Christian pilgrimage. So I'm going to say a little bit about the when and the where and the why of Christian pilgrimage in this short presentation. So one of the things I should start with, and often surprises people, is that Christian attitudes towards sacred space and sacred travel, pilgrimage is not always positive, at least not in the beginning, and it took quite a while to establish. So we really don't have any examples, as far as we know, of Christian pilgrims before about the early 4th century. And that sometimes is kind of surprising, especially considering how important pilgrimage was in Jewish practice, in the sense of making pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the temple for the sacred feasts, to that sacred place. But within Christianity, God, at least initially, is not thought to be confined to specific places or even especially accessible in certain spaces. The insistence that God is everywhere and equally present, perhaps even more to the inward self than to the external world. And so I have a couple of texts that you can see on the screen that come from the Bible, one from the Gospel of John, or actually two short quotations from the Gospel of John, the 4th Gospel, in which we sort of see the insistence that God is not present in a certain place, and that it is the Spirit that gives life and the flesh that is of no avail. Or in this text from the Apostle Paul, when he was preaching in the city of Athens, the God who made the world and all that is in it does not dwell in sanctuaries made by human hands. So one of the things that I'm pointing out to my students in my class currently on Christian architecture is that it takes a while before we have established even churches. And we have someone like Gregory of Nyssa, who has lovely pictures on the right there, who sort of insists that there isn't any difference in any place one might go. But this changes in the 4th century significantly, and it changes initially with the building of the important shrine in Jerusalem at the site of the tomb of Jesus, and also soon thereafter the site of the crucifixion at the site of Golgotha. And this is under the Emperor Constantine. We established something that was called the Holy Land, and we see our first pilgrims arriving around the 330s in Jerusalem, and partly to see these sites of the Holy Sepulchre. We have on the right what it looks like today. That doesn't look like when it was built, but this is what you would see today if you went to Jerusalem. And on the left is a small picture of a famous pilgrim by the name of Egeria, who is one of the best known early Christian pilgrims, probably came to travel in many places, including Jerusalem around the 380s. But we have the first evidence for Christian pilgrims really not before about the 330s. And then we see this practice burgeoning and becoming really important in Christianity. I will say it happens around the same time that we also begin to see a cult of Christian relics and even eventually Christian portraits and icons. So we sometimes call this the material turn within Christianity around this time. Two quick quotations that I think actually capture that idea. One of them is from St. Jerome, an epistle he wrote around the 370s. And he says in this epistle, to worship on the spot where the feet of the Lord once stood is part of the faith. That is something that is new, actually, by this time, I think, still. And a little later than Jerome, another bishop, a bishop of Nola in Italy by the name of Paulinus, talks about the fact that this draws people to Jerusalem with a desire to see and touch the places where Christ was physically present. And I'm not going to read this whole text, but he says this desire is a truly religious one, to see the places in which Christ walked and suffered, rose again, and ascended into heaven. And if there is a blessing in taking and keeping a pinch of dust from these places and even a little piece of the cross, then this is wonderful. And so we see at the same time people moving, and on the right you'll see an image of the Via Dolorosa in the old city of Jerusalem, where of course modern pilgrims still come to walk these places, to walk where Christ walked, to see where he suffered, to see where he died and rose again. I would add, of course, very quickly, we also go to Bethlehem, we go to Nazareth, we go to the other places, Cana and Capernaum. So these are the places where Christians now are going to come, but it all happens really not any earlier than around the 330s. The Holy Sepulchre was dedicated not before about 336. So the question is where do pilgrims go? Where do Christian pilgrims go on pilgrimage? And there's a few answers to that. First of all, as we've just said, and initially to the very sites where these sacred events took place. And it doesn't have to only be events around Christ's life. events around the stories of the Old Testament, especially Sinai, become an important place for Christian pilgrims. So Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Sinai, these places where God took action in history, where historical events took place, where Christ lived, but also to the tombs and the relics of holy men and women. And this may have even predated, we think possibly, to the actual pilgrimage to the holy places, that very early Christians, maybe by the 2nd century, were even going to the site where Peter had been martyred in Rome. And so we see that continuing throughout the history of Christianity, to go to the tombs of the saints and to places where their relics were, or places where they ministered or were martyred. Another kind of place is a secondary sort of place where relics were translated. So we have a wonderful story of the Holy House of Loreto getting to Italy. And so that is the House of the Virgin Mary. It seems to have flown all the way to Italy to find its new home. St. James was found at Compostela in Spain. And then on the right, you can see a wonderful picture of pilgrims climbing the steps of the Santa Scala in Rome, supposed to be from the Praetorium where Pilate judged Jesus. And who brought these steps to Rome? It's a good question. Maybe the Empress Helena, possibly. That's the tradition, at least. So these are sometimes out of place sacred places. They weren't in their original sites. They came to be where they were, and now pilgrims come to them. Another place that pilgrims come is to where the holy objects are kept. And so the crown of thorns, as we may know in Notre Dame in Paris, and we were all worried about that when the cathedral was burning down, or the manger that Christ was put in Bethlehem is now at Santa Maria Maggiore, or the Virgin's veil in the cathedral in Chartres. So sometimes it's not bodily relics or tombs, or even sacred places. These are objects that are associated with saints and are kept and they travel. They can travel. We also go to the sites where miracles happened, where apparitions were seen, so Lourdes and Fatima. So these are the places where pilgrims go, and they can be very many kinds of places. So we have pilgrims going to Rome, to Canterbury, to the Holy Land, to Lindisfarne, to all sorts of places around the world, and it is truly global now. Why do people go on pilgrimage? And I wanted to sort of bring this out quickly. One of them is to make a devotional journey. People go to pray, they go to encounter the sacred places, and just to be there, to feel that, to have a kind of encounter with that holy history. So we account for Jerusalem and to the saints' tombs. Pilgrims also go to seek healing. These places where miracles happen are places also of healing, physical healing. And we go to receive blessings and indulgences. Pilgrims going to Rome during the Jubilee years. They do penance. Penitential pilgrims are very important. And so people trying to work out their works of penance will often go on a long, arduous journey, but they also go to have an adventure. This is often very much the case of the famous Canterbury pilgrims. We see adventure travel as well, encounter the divine, to go to these places where they might actually have themselves an encounter with an apparition or a vision. And finally, I should say, the journey is as important as the destination. Sometimes the journey is a very important part of the pilgrimage. It's not just to arrive, it's to make the journey itself. And that can be stressful, strenuous, and arduous, and that is important in many ways, for many times. So pilgrims bring things to the places, they bring things back from the places, and they bring themselves mostly. They often have very simple garb, very simple walking sticks, small bags, carry their own knapsacks in order to have a kind of challenging travel. Finally, and I wanted to say just a little bit at the end about the economics of pilgrimage. So there's so many things that go into the work of what the pilgrim encounters and has to produce, or what we need to produce for them. Housing and stables, obviously for the animals initially, transport of other kinds, supplies along the way, guides and maps and routes are very much a part of the economics of pilgrimage, and also the souvenirs. the things that pilgrims brought back, including on the right, you can see a nice little pilgrim's badge that were very popular in the Middle Ages, to get a badge that you would say where you had been. The local economy also depended on sacred tourism in many cases. So this was really important for certain cities around the world. The impact of this income from various pilgrims' expenditures of lodging and eating and receiving and getting and souvenirs and so forth. And I can sort of, you see in the picture here, you actually see the Canterbury, you can see the cathedral behind, but you see the services for pilgrims. And last of all, to say something about the fact that we can reproduce sites of pilgrimage. They're replicable and they can be multiplied and brought to other places. And this was particularly important when pilgrims could no longer get to the Holy Land, especially during the time of the Crusades in the Middle Ages. The Franciscans had to sort of rethink, and we see this in the 15th and 16th century, especially the moving of the Stations of the Cross, that you could move them into churches, you could move them into outdoor spaces, and pilgrims could come and make those kinds of pilgrimages when they could not get to the holy places themselves. So the tomb of Christ even gets moved, and you'll see one in a minute. But we also can think of modern examples, the building of labyrinths, very popular sort of alternate pilgrimage kind of an experience, and even maybe the Holy Land theme park that we might see in Florida. So I'm going to close with this wonderful image of a reproduction of a pilgrimage site in London, or sorry, this one's in Cambridge. There is one like it in London. So we can see that the tomb of Christ could be reproduced and put in large architectural form, or sometimes in small forms within churches as well, to be used during the Easter season as part of the Easter liturgy, the Good Friday liturgy and the Easter liturgy. So there's a lot of ways in which we can think about what pilgrimages do, why people go, when it started, and where they went. So I will stop with that. I'm going to pass my baton on to my next speaker, and we'll take questions at the end. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. And of course, we remember that here in Notre Dame, we have the replica of Marian Shrine, Our Lady of Lourdes, here on campus. So continues in US context as well. We're now going to hear from Alex.
I too wanted to extend my thanks to you, Sister Annie, for moderating our event, and for the Institute's Ansari and Medieval, as well as my colleagues, Robin and Mun'im. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you guys. I'm also thrilled that Professor Jensen went first, so I can just say ditto, right, for Chinese Buddhism, when the case might be, or say, you know, we do things a little bit differently in our corner of the world, and have the opportunity to build and share knowledge in that way. I wanted to begin with a disclaimer that I'm not a specialist in pilgrimage or in religious space or movement, like Professor Jensen is. So I'll be summarizing some secondary scholarship. Chinese Buddhist pilgrimage is still a very hot topic. And there's lots of different places to explore, a lot of different authors, and feel free to email me at any time, or ask questions in the Q&A, and I'll try to hook you up with sources. I thought it would be a fun thing to translate pilgrimage for healing and liberation into Chinese. I don't know how accurate that is. I was born here in the States. I learned all my Chinese in college and grad school. So it might not sound right, but I think all the spaces are here, or all the parts of the pilgrimage for healing and liberation are in those 6 characters. But I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about translation. So my first slide is of the Monkey King. And if you talk to anyone from the Chinese cultural sphere, they're familiar with the Monkey King as the great defender of the monk Tang Sanzang, or Xuanzang, who traveled west to recover scriptures from India, bring them back home, and the Monkey King defends the monk from monsters of all kinds. Comic books, serials, even traveled to Japan and Korea, maybe familiar to your kids or our kids or people in the audience as Goku from Dragon Ball Z. Sun Wukong, that's the name of the Monkey King. Wukong in Japanese is Goku. So Goku's ancestor is the Monkey King. The Monkey King's ancestor, some people have argued, might be Hanuman, the monkey god from Hinduism. And so here again, we see great movements in medieval times of gods, even from different religious traditions to new religious traditions. So the Monkey King is most famously located in a Ming Dynasty 16th century novel of 100 chapters. There is a mythical cycle and performance cycle that precedes and postcedes this novel, but one name that the Monkey King is referred to in this novel is Xingzhe, or pilgrim, right? And Xingzhe is a polyvalent, means a lot of different, it's a term that has a lot of different meanings. Xing, for those of you that speak modern Mandarin, know that is also the character for a pedestrian, right? A xingren is a pedestrian. So pilgrim is someone who's moving through space, as pilgrim is, but xing can also mean practice. So he's also a practitioner. So the Monkey King is both on a spiritual journey of redemption. He's on a physical journey. He's accompanying the monk to India to recover scriptures. And he's also undergoing his own spiritual journey toward one of the Buddhist telos of enlightenment. In the scholarly literature on pilgrimage in Chinese Buddhism, many scholars often describe this impasse at trying to figure out how this concept that we're very familiar with in the Christian West and has accrued all these different meanings throughout time, how to make it fit in Chinese. And nothing works exactly right. So there are a couple of terms that have been used in the scholarly literature, at least, to think about pilgrimage. Chinese Buddhists might not have had a particular term that's exactly alike to modern Christian pilgrimage. And I'm curious to hear from Professor Sirry too, if the Hajj, maps onto Christian notions of pilgrimage or not, and what we might say is unique or interesting about those differences. Two terms that show up in the literature, qiufa and taosheng. So qiufa, up top, to seek the Dharma, describes the adventure of the Monkey King and the monk whom he accompanied. The story of the monk is rooted in historical fact. The Monkey King is the mythology that kind of grew out of that, and the story cycle that grew out of that. The monk and the monkey were going to India to seek the Dharma. So qiufa, it captures that aspect of pilgrimage, but a different term could be taosheng, which might derive from earlier Chinese notions of taoshan. One volume that I looked at about Chinese pilgrimage overall, trying to figure out where Chinese pilgrimage might begin from outside of Buddhism, to think about pilgrimage as a larger phenomenon in the Chinese cultural sphere, described, well, from very early ancient times, it appears that Chinese people from all walks of life came to mountains to see and experience holy things. So taosheng means to have audience with, to present oneself before, in a kind of courtly metaphor, the sacred. That's what sheng means. Shan is a mountain, and the character looks like a mountain, as our students in first year Chinese have been taught. Sometimes the phrase taoshan is duplicated to taoshan jinshan, and the metaphor of incense, right? Coming with incense, presenting incense, burning incense, being the ones that have to purchase and source incense in various ways, becomes a metaphor for Chinese notions of pilgrimage overall. As an archetype for seeking the Dharma, this is the historical monk that the Monkey King supposedly accompanied out to the West. You can notice from the artistic depiction here, he's a very learned monk. He's traveling by himself. And he's got the Dharma with him, that is the Buddhist teachings, all wrapped up in all these different scrolls. He probably would not have recovered them in scroll form from India, where writing cultures often showed up on birch bark leaves and other forms of manuscript culture that weren't scrolls. Sure, an East Asian kind of innovation. But you get this idea, right, of seeking the Dharma in this particular archetype. Xuanzang was active in the 7th century. He's famous for initiating a highly scholastic Yogacara school of Buddhist philosophy when he returned to China, and also known as being a more rigorous translator of texts than translations that had come before. And he's become an important symbol for diplomacy when the contemporary Chinese state invokes Xuanzang in his travels on the Silk Road. Often they're doing so for diplomatic or political reason. By contrast, visiting the sacred Taosong. This is an image from the sacred site at Wutaishan in North China. According to the flower ornament scripture, which is a really important scripture in Chinese Buddhism, Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, supposedly resided in a mountain out somewhere there in the east, right? And so the Chinese started looking in Wutaishan, and what do they know? Manjushri was there, right? And so they built shrines for him there. Manjushri appeared to people there in the same way that Mary appears in different parts of Europe as well, returning to this idea of replication and reterritorialization. It becomes a mark, a high water mark in Chinese Buddhism when pilgrims come from other parts of Buddhist Asia, right, from Japan or Korea or Tibet or Central Asia to visit Manjushri in China. Right, it's a sign that Chinese Buddhism had come into its own. So to summarize these two genres or two ideal types of Chinese Buddhist pilgrimage, we have on the one hand seeking the Dharma, on the other hand visiting the sacred, right? And I've organized in this slide how we might think of these as on two halves of a spectrum or two ends of a spectrum, right? So on the one hand, we have the model of a heroic monk traveling by himself, and Xuanzang did not get permission from the state, right? This he did. He organized this pilgrimage at his own expense, at great hardship to himself. And so there are these images, right, of the monk traveling through the desert, having to fight off monsters, sometimes accompanied by the Monkey King, that has great spiritual significance, right? Out in the desert by yourself, doing it because you really love Buddhism and really want to recover these scriptures. It shows a more ascetic mode, right, of pilgrimage. Probably historically, he came with a coterie, probably he traveled with trade caravans. But in the depictions of him, both in historiographic texts as well as fictional texts that arose later, he's doing it by himself. And I'll read a passage later from an early hagiography. Seeking the Dharma is India-centric, whereas visiting the sacred is within Greater China. So I could also have some slides. I haven't prepared them as well about what the sacred sites of Buddhism are in North Central India. But Xuanzang also left extensive records of his travels in India. He was there for his full journey was 17 years. So he spent a lot of time outside of China, building knowledge, making connections, becoming more awakened. And he goes to different sites in India and goes to where the Buddha was born, where the Buddha passed into nirvana, where the Buddha first taught, where the Buddha had his great awakening. We can think of this model as, or these two models as, in a very rough heuristic, dividing the early medieval from the late medieval, right? Xuanzang and other monks who went to India to recover scriptures, recover the Dharma, are traveling in the early medieval period, right? So there are a few monks before Xuanzang that are famous for having made the full return journey. Lots of monks also went to India and never came back. also around the turn of the millennium, right, Buddhism is fading in popularity and interest in India. And so that kind of movement toward relocating the sources of sacredness within China, at mountains, first of all, but also in sacred sites that are in cities and villages and towns all over China, kind of show this movement, or what some scholars describe as either the Indianization of China, the Buddhistization of China, or the Sinification of Buddhism. And you can see, right, the mode of pilgrimage changes. You can imagine something akin to modern commercial tourism / pilgrimage, right? Those things going together. The road can be easier for traveling to mountains. And we have records from the late medieval period and in the early modern period of wealthy people, having an easy way up the mountain. They get carried up, right? And there's a whole economy around making things very, very comfortable for this second type of pilgrim, which encompasses a larger proportion of society overall. I wanted to bring up the Silk Road as a facilitator of the spread of Buddhism, but is written by commerce first and foremost, right? So the movement of silk from China to the West, to Persia, to Byzantium, and of precious metals and gems from Central Asia and from India out east as well. Monks and other pilgrims could kind of freeload upon this commercial venture. But Xuanzang and the Monkey King would have moved from one center, right? You can see China there is depicted as having one center there. In this overland route, I wonder if you can see my cursor, maybe not, through the Taklamakan Desert, through mountain passes, through what is present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, into Buddhism's homeland in north-central India and Nepal. One theme that shows up in some of these early records of Xuanzang and other Buddhist monks who went west to recover the Dharma is actually of inhospitality. So I'm going to be reading from the life of Xuanzang, one of the first hagiographies of this monk. Having gone on from this, he forthwith entered on the Saho desert. There are no birds overhead and no beasts below. There is neither water nor herb to be found. On occasions, according to the sun's shadow, he would, with the utmost devotion, intone the name of Guan Shi-in Bodhisattva, that's Guan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, who becomes a Mary-like figure in China, and the Ban Ruo Xin Sutra, that's the Heart Sutra. Arriving at the Saha, as he passed through it, he encountered all sorts of demon shapes and strange goblins which seemed to surround him before and behind. Although he invoked the name of Guan Yin, he could not drive them all away, but when he recited the sutra, at the sound of the words, they all disappeared in a moment. Whenever he was in danger, it was to this alone that he trusted for his safety and deliverance. So you can see how a whole mythic cycle arises from events like these that happen to Xuanzang in fact. And of course, we can contrast these travails in the desert and encounters of monsters with hospitality on the other end, right? Either in China or in India, where a rich culture of monasticism promoted travel for monks to move in between different centers of learning, to study with different teachers, study different texts. There were provisions for monks, especially, to move around between schools and between countries and between nationalities. There's this vision, right, of a Buddhist cosmopolitanism at this time. A little bit on the sacred geography of Buddhism. This is a map of Xuanzang's journeys. I want to apologize. This was a translation from the 19th century. There are probably better translations of this now, but the Victorian British who started the study of Buddhism out here in the West, right? We're indebted to them, but translation leaves a lot to be desired as well. Yes, so you can see all these sacred sites in the Gangetic Valley that Xuanzang traveled to. Saw a lot of similar things that Professor Jensen mentioned. Holy relics, sacred sites, not just of where the Buddha was and taught and did his amazing things, but where later Buddhist saints also did amazing things, as well as Xuanzang will occasionally note in his records. Here is where a past life of the Buddha even existed as a monkey or another. I keep talking about monkeys, or as princes in his past life. These are the 5 great mountains in China. This is from a tourist site. They're supposedly arranged in the 5 different directions: north, south, west, east, central. This system of organizing Chinese sacred geography was a long time in the making, but it's taken for granted now. Each of these sites are home to Taoist sites, popular religious sites, and Buddhist sites, as well as Confucian sites. So one thing that's unique about the Chinese situation, well, maybe unique, but also maybe a point of similarity to the Holy Land, is that these are sites of overlapping sacredness for different religious traditions. And in some cases that can be very contentious, but for the most part, it just added to the liveliness of these sites, right? A Chinese pilgrim could come and see some Buddhist sites and some Taoist sites, and receive healing and liberation from one site, maybe healing from one site, liberation from another site. There's a lot of mixing and matching and efflorescence. And diversity is kind of the name of the game in China. Our 4 Buddhist mountains. There are also 4 Taoist mountains. I just wanted to give a shout out to these 4 sites. Mount Wutai, where Manjushri lives, and lots of scholarship has been produced on contemporary pilgrimage as well as historical pilgrimage at Wutai. And Putuo, out in the sea, is where Guanyin, right, who Xuanzang prayed to, lives. Jiuhua is where Kshitigarbha or Dizang, one of these bodhisattvas of death, is located. And Eme in Sichuan is where Samantabhadra exists. Finally, wanted to give a shout out to a 1991 volume by Yu Junfang and Susan Nekin, which compiles a lot of different essays in the early 90s when scholars of China wanted to thematize pilgrimage. There's a similar tension, as Professor Jensen mentioned, between Buddhism saying, you don't need to travel anywhere, right? Enlightenment can be received anywhere. Just like God exists everywhere, enlightenment exists everywhere, right? So you don't need to go anywhere special. At the same time, there are really special spaces. So we can happy to have more of that conversation. And thanks for letting me run long.
Thank you so much, Alex. Seeking wisdom and seeking teaching is the journey, something of the experience of the journey leads us to wisdom, and understanding is a wonderful idea to have in mind. Professor Sirry, Mun'im, you are next.
Thanks, Anne, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me also begin by echoing the sentiment expressed by colleagues to thanks the organizer. I am honored to participate in this webinar and join distinguished presenters. In my short presentations, hopefully in 12 minutes, I would like to talk about various expressions of spiritual journey in Islamic traditions. Pilgrimage can mean a variety of things across different religious and cultural traditions. Even within a single tradition, it can be expressed differently. And Islamic traditions is not an exception. In fact, I would argue that the various practices of pilgrimage can serve as a window to understand Islam in everyday life. I will first talk about the specific meaning of pilgrimage and then discuss its various forms. I will read my note, I guess, in order to stick it with the allocated time. When Muslims talk about pilgrimage or Hajj in Arabic, they mean a specific practice, namely going to Mecca to perform the final pillar of Islam. As we know that there are 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is confession of faith, declaring that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, performing prayer, fasting, and giving, and finally pilgrimage. However, pilgrimage is unique in the sense that it is not performed, or it is only performed once in lifetimes. Muslims pray 5 times a day, fast the whole month each year, and give almsgiving annually. However, they are not required to perform pilgrimage more than once. Given that pilgrimage to Mecca involve financial responsibilities and physical challenges, especially for those living afar from the Holy Land, it is not obligatory to all Muslims. Only those who can meet certain conditions, such as healthy and financially able, are required to do so. According to the Islamic narrative, the rituals of pilgrimage reflect the life of Abraham and his family. In the Quran, Abraham makes a declaration of pilgrimage. This is a verse of the Quran, and proclaim to mankind the pilgrimage, and they will come to you on foot, on lean camel, and they will come from every distant pass. It is hardly surprising that despite the difficulties and challenges, every year many Muslims from all over the world go to the holy city of Mecca to perform Hajj. And it is in this place that Muslims from different backgrounds and social status pray together, perform Hajj rituals, wearing the same clothes, irrespective of their status back home. And I think it is not an exaggeration to say that Hajj is the highest expression of Islamic civilization that subsumes every race and culture. As I said earlier, Muslim pilgrims have to deal with multiplicity of difficulties, physical necessities, travel problems, concern about safety, accommodation, and also spiritual maturations. Let me elaborate on this point, particularly the challenges and expectation before going on Hajj and the aftermath. It is worth noting that Indonesian Muslims represent the largest number of pilgrims going to Mecca each year. There are more than 3 million Muslims travel to Mecca each year from all over the globe, and about 20% of them are Indonesian Muslims. Of course, this is understandable because Indonesia is the largest majority Muslim country. But does this also mean that Indonesian Muslims have more financial support to do the Hajj? And I don't think the answer is affirmative. Many Indonesian pilgrims, and I think most of them, have to save up money every day, little by little, for 10, 20, or 30 years in order to be able to fulfill their lifetime dreams. Even if they have enough money to travel to Mecca, most Indonesian Muslims will have to wait for 5 or 10 years due to limited quota. In addition, many pilgrims encounter uncertainties about their visa from the Saudi authorities. To make things even more complicated, since Hajj is not part of daily practices, they have to learn about a series of rituals that have to be performed during pilgrimage. How to do a sequence of rituals, how to behave, what kind of clothes are needed, are just some of the facts that pilgrims have to know before they go. So the question is, why do they still want to go to the Holy Land? What motivates them? Despite the difficulties, pilgrims express their desire to do Hajj again and again. Of course, their motivation might vary from one person to another. I don't think I have enough time to explore this, but one thing is clear, that their motivations is not simply to experience the utmost spiritual life, which of course they do. Pilgrims also search for a way to spiritually improve their everyday life back home. Let me conclude the first part of my talk by saying something about this. Several pilgrims that I talked to said that once they return home, the real test began. Would they transform so fully and live up to the moral developed during Hajj? They often describe the Hajj as a transformative experience on both personal and social level. Once they have performed pilgrimage, the returning pilgrims are given the honorific title back home as Al-Hajj for male or Al-Hajjah for female. On the personal level, with this new title as Al-Hajj or Hajjah, pilgrims strive to be more pious in their life. While the idea of born again is a Christian concept, Muslims also think that upon their return from the pilgrimage, they feel like they start a new life. It is not unusual for pilgrims even to change their name. On the social level, returning pilgrims also enjoy special status in society. For instance, they are often invited as a witness to marriages or act as judges in case of disputes, as their opinions and ideas are highly respected in the community. In short, upon their return, pilgrims usually enjoy both spiritual and social benefits. Now, let me turn to the second part of my talk about other types of pilgrims or pilgrimage. Here, I will discuss quote unquote non-normative pilgrimage practiced by Muslims in Morocco in Indonesia. I know that the word non-normative to describe non-Hajj pilgrimage is problematic because for practitioners, their practice obviously does not contradict Islamic norm. My purpose here is simply to show that pilgrimage can be experienced differently in different contexts. Let me say at the outset that doing pilgrimage to holy sites other than the Kaaba in Mecca is a controversial issue among Muslims. For poor Muslims in Morocco who are not able to travel to Mecca, local pilgrimage known as pilgrimage of the poor or Al-Hajj al-Miskin is performed as an alternative spiritual journey. On the day when pilgrims perform Hajj in Mecca, hundreds of Moroccan Muslims also gather at sites they consider holy to perform pilgrimage. The practice of pilgrimage of the poor at two cities, namely the shrines of Sidi Shakal and Sidi Boukhiyar, is unique as it takes place at a specific time of the year and resonate with elements of pilgrimage in Mecca. The origin of this pilgrimage is not well known among Moroccan. However, there are names after well-known Sufi who lived in the 11th and 12th century. According to local pilgrims, Sidi Shakal let Moroccan traveling to Mecca use his shrine as site for practicing Hajj rituals. Others believe that both sites possess a great blessing or barakah, which make them suitable to function as pilgrimage places for those unable to travel to Mecca. So this is the shrine of Sidi Shakal, located on the west coast of Morocco. The shrines consist of one-room building situated on the top of a large rock. This is the only building in the area. As you can see, that some pilgrims climb few steps in order to enter shrine, while others circle the building, which resemble the circumambulation of Kaaba in Mecca. Interestingly, that some pilgrims refer to this building as Arafah, which is the name of a place in Mecca where the main rituals of Hajj is performed. This is the gathering of pilgrims in Arafah. On the same day, other pilgrims gather together at the shrines of Sidi Boukhiyar, located at the highest points in the Jabal Hammam, or the mountain of Hammam, some 2,000 meters above sea level. The shrines consist of small rectangle structure where Sidi Boukhiyar is believed to be buried. This is a picture of their gathering at the shrine Sidi Boukhiyar. The rituals include circling and standing near the site, which is an imitation of the shrine of Hajj in Mecca. Let me now give you another example of local pilgrimage in Indonesia, in the island of Java, a place that I know best, which reflect interfaith pilgrimage. Pilgrimage sites in Indonesia are not limited to the shrines of Sufis or saints. Pilgrims might visit impressive natural landscapes such as mountain, cave, sea, which they consider holy, or loci of spiritual and magical forces. While Indonesian Muslims and Christians might have their own spiritually potent sites, the rituals are often combined with Javanese syncretic practices. Because of the richness of syncretic heritage in Java, Muslims and Christians can jointly visit the same sites. The Javanese people, whether Muslims, Christians, Hindus, or Buddhists, like to spend time in such places, praying together, meditating, presenting offerings such as a meal of blessing. So yes, there are several sacred places in Java that have become the melting point of inter-religious pilgrimage known as ziarah in the country. This is true not only with the grave of Middle Ages saint, but also even the more recent one. An example is the grave of the fourth president of Indonesia, Abdurrahman Wahid or Gus Dur, the grandson of the founder of Nahdlatul Ulama, the largest Muslim organization in the country. His grave has now become the pilgrimage site of Indonesian pilgrims of different religious backgrounds. In addition to being a new leader, during his time, Gus Dur was known as the staunch defender of minority groups. He died in 2009, and he was buried in Jombang, East Java. Since then, his gravesite has become the place of visitors from morning to night. And today, more than 3,000 pilgrims visit his grave every day. And the number can increase during the holidays. They come in groups or individually from all over the country, both Muslims and non-Muslims. I found this statistic quite interesting from this article entitled Motivation of Visitors to the Tomb Area of Abdurrahman Wahid. So according to the Department of Culture and Tourism, in 2018, there were over 1 million visitors to Gus Dur or Abdurrahman Wahid grave. Remember that Gus Dur or Abdurrahman Wahid is the newest one. The other 5 tombs are the grave of pre-modern Sufis. As you can see from the screen, in total, there are over 9 million pilgrims each year to seek shrine in East Java alone. This is remarkable, given that there are more than hundreds, other pilgrim sites in Java. Obviously, their goals of visiting pilgrimage sites vary, ranging from searching for spiritual experience to wishing to honor the dead or simply seeking worldly gains. For researchers, it is really interesting to observe the meaning-making process in the everyday practice of their religions. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mun'im. We have a few minutes for questions. So if our audience would like to ask any questions in the Q&A, I can field those. We have one from Professor George Greenia, and this is in particular for Professor Jensen, but maybe others can weigh in on it as well. Is there medieval documentation for walking a labyrinth as a virtual pilgrimage? It's a popular claim now and a legitimate modern spiritual practice, but did medieval folks actually speak in those terms for labyrinths? And it makes me wonder, are labyrinths more widely a wider phenomenon in different religious traditions?
I'll jump in really quickly to say I think that the actual practices of the labyrinths in the Middle Ages are pretty much mysterious. We assume that they might have had some liturgical purpose, possibly particularly during the Easter season, but it's not absolutely certain how they were used. And I would actually add that labyrinths, although we think of them as medieval and they're in all over Europe, especially in France, but there's some in Italy as well, go back all the way to the 4th century. So we even have pre-Christian labyrinths, and maybe maybe we would see those in some of the other religious traditions as well. But the labyrinths often were so small initially to be walked around on. And I think they mainly served as a kind of beautiful symbol of the journey of life. One I can think of in Africa, which is in Algeria, and a church in Algeria. It's now in a museum in Algeria. But anyway, it's quite small, but it is, you probably could trace it with your finger maybe, but it leads you through the journey to the center, which, and at the center it says the sacred church, or Ecclesia Sancta. So it's a beautiful symbol, and it's a pre-Christian symbol for sure. And Christians borrowed the symbol to show a kind of journey, an image of the journey of life. And if we used it, I think they're wonderful that they're used now. I think that's a great interior, a wonderful way of having a prayer walk. But I'm not sure that we could say that we know much about how they were really used when they were first built in the various places they were. But thank you for the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Would Mun'im or Alex, you want to weigh in on labyrinths? We have a comment directed toward Mun'im. Hajj existed before Islam. Kaaba was a shrine dedicated to idol worship. One could contextualize this by saying that the Kaaba was a place of gathering of people of different belief systems, because Kaaba was located at an important trading site in Arabia. Interesting to note that the origins of pilgrimage may not have been purely for spiritual reasons, but may also be for economic purposes. And Mun'im, would you like to respond to that comment? And maybe we could all think about kind of the intersections with economic motivations and trade around pilgrimage routes as well.
Yeah, I would agree with the assessment that Kaaba was regarded highly even before the time of Islam, and we have a good reason to believe that kings surrounding Arabia at the time, they often present something to the Kaaba, and even from within the Islamic sources themselves, we find a report suggesting that Arab tribes tend to have their own idols during the Kaaba, surrounding the Kaaba. And it is reported in the Islamic sources that when Muhammad came back to Mecca, basically there were more than 300 idols surrounding the Kaaba, including, which is very interesting, including the statue of Mary and Jesus. So while all the idols were instructed to be destroyed according to the Islamic traditions, that the Prophet Muhammad asked the Muslims not to destroy the statue of Jesus and Mary, which is quite interesting. So all the idols were destroyed except the statue of Jesus and Mary. That's something that we learn from the Islamic traditions.
Thank you. And I'm sure we could go on and on. We are at the end of our time. We want to keep it to 1 hour. So I want to thank again our marvelous panelists for their sharing. It's really been such an enriching webinar time. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And we hope you'll be back for the next event in our pilgrimage series. Our next topic is becoming a pilgrim people. So we're going to hear from some theologians, and that will be on February 10th. So again, to learn more about the series, you can visit medieval.md.edu/pilgrimage. And I'd like to thank again our co-sponsors, the Ansari Institute. Thank them for co-sponsoring this event. And to learn more about the Ansari Institute and its programs, please visit ansari.md.edu. You can sign up for their mailing list, and you can also follow them on Twitter @AnsariUND. So thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon and weekend.